Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be a bit of a chattier type of video. As you've seen from the title, I'm just going to talk about myself today and how my beliefs and mindsets towards money has changed over the past 27 years. So unlike most of my other videos, there'll be no number crunching, no spreadsheets, no tables. But if you've watched enough of my videos, then you'll know that I'm usually more interested in the why and how of things more than the end result itself. I always try to think about why I do the things I do or think the way I think. And I also like to reflect on how my beliefs and mindsets have changed over the years as well. In this video, I want to share 8 money beliefs that I used to hold growing up and well into my early adulthood. A lot of these beliefs I absorbed from the people around me, or I came to my own conclusions based on what I observed. And I want to talk about how they've changed and what inspired the change. You might resonate with some of what I'll share, or you might disagree. I would love to hear what you think. An important thing to note is that I'm not saying that my old beliefs were wrong and my new beliefs are the correct one. In fact, you'll see that some beliefs I only just recently changed my mind about, and it's influenced not just by experience and knowledge, but also the stage of life I'm in. So I think of old beliefs as beliefs that used to serve me, and now they don't, so the new beliefs are now more helpful to me in my life. Most times I'm just ping-ponging between extremes until I settle into some healthy middle ground. There might be more ping-ponging in the future, and these ideas will continue to evolve and change as I evolve and change myself. With that long introduction out of the way, let's get on to the video. My first belief that I've had to unlearn is the belief that money is something that you have or something you don't. It sounds very simplistic because it is, and there's no nuance. It's like infant stage thinking. I used to think that you don't really have a choice about whether or not you have money. It's just this thing that falls into your lap, and for a lot of us, it might not be that much. And it probably makes a lot of sense if you're a child because you don't have as much control over how much money you get from the adults around you. When I began to manage my money properly, that's when I began to see it as a powerful tool that you can wield. I started tracking my expenses when I was 16, but it wasn't until just before I started university that I began managing quite large sums of money because I was getting bursaries for my tuition fees. I knew that my parents couldn't support me through university, so from the time I graduated from junior college, I made it a point to never trouble them about money. I got a job after JC, I applied for a Mendaki tuition fee subsidy so that I could go to uni for free. I applied for all the financial aid and study loans I could get in order to sustain myself through 4 years of education. And I also worked part-time F&B jobs all throughout university so that I had disposable income to spend on the things that a young person wants to spend on, like clothes or books. This was a major turning point for me because it marked my financial independence from my parents. I could control how much money I earned to some extent. And then the second turning point was after I graduated from university and I was stuck at home during lockdown and was reading all these personal finance blogs about how to budget your first salary, what kind of insurance to get, how to invest. I was already used to tracking my money and knowing how to put aside money for different needs and goals. So I saw this as leveling up my knowledge and skills. And it was so fun to me because it was a new thing to learn, and I saw that it made a really meaningful difference in my attitude and mindset towards money. When you feel like you can manage your money well, it makes you confident and it's one less thing to worry about in life. So my new belief is money is a very powerful tool, and once you learn the basics of wielding it, it's mostly uphill from there. For my second belief that I have learned to let go, it's actually more of a mindset, and that is to go with the flow. I guess this is related to my previous belief about money being something that you have or you don't. To explain this better, I think we might have to backtrack quite a bit because it's more than just about money. It's like a fundamental belief system that I grew up with that shaped how I viewed the things that happened to me and my agency in all of it. I think a lot of you can probably relate. I grew up in a household that is relatively conservative, and my extended family were all pretty religious. That obviously had a huge influence, and we had a very fatalistic view on life in general. Fatalistic in the sense that we believe that all events are predetermined and inevitable and everything is God's will, so all you could do was accept your fate. If it's your rizki, then thank God, good for you. But if it's not, then too bad, just accept it. And so I believed my family was just poor because it was not our fate to be rich. I'm not going to argue about this on a theological basis, I'm just sharing its impact on me and my mindset. And to be honest, I think if you're in a position where you believe you have very little agency and power to change your circumstances, it's actually quite a relief to think that it's all just fate. You feel like it's not your fault, and you just learn and adapt to your circumstances. There's this thing called learned helplessness, and it happens when someone goes through stress and hardship repeatedly, such that they come to believe that they have no control over the situation or have any power to change it. And so even when opportunities to change their situation comes up, they can't grasp it and they might not even try. I observe this a lot in the people around me, and while I didn't subscribe fully to this idea that everything is just fate, I was still a bit more passive and a go with the flow kind of person. I used to think that as long as I work, my life will sort itself out, my money will just grow somehow and I'll be fine. And it wasn't until COVID, when I got my first job, that I completely rejected this idea. Like, I told myself, I no longer have the privilege of being a go with the flow person anymore. I had to step up and take care of my family. I had to be the adult. I had to do all these things that required a great deal of responsibility and maturity from me. And so I stopped thinking it, I stopped saying it to myself, and I shifted my mindset to always finding a way to influence my situation, no matter how small. Which might make me sound like a nightmare of a person, but I swear I can be fun and easygoing. It's just that in this period of my life, it's only going to hold me back if I don't make a conscious, concerted effort to always be intentional with the way my life is going. I'm not always successful at this. I'm not saying that everything in my life now is deliberately planned this way, but it's more like I'm trying to be more aware of my intentions, my actions, my efforts, and my goals. To relate this back to money, it links back to my previous point about understanding that money is a tool I can wield. So if it's something that I can control, then it also means I can use it to plan for things much further ahead. So from being very reactive to situations and using money as a way to just patch up the holes as I encounter them along the way, I've become more proactive and begun to use money to pave the road ahead of me instead. These days, I'm far more intentional with my efforts to manage my money and making sure that I'm making time and space for the things that matter to me, like making sure I budget enough for travel, for my language classes, for my bubble tea. And I'm always setting goals for myself to make sure that I'm always moving forward and making progress. I feel better about myself when I know that I'm constantly bettering myself, even if the efforts are small. I came across this parable a few years ago and it's always stuck with me. I think about it all the time when I feel overwhelmed by everything that I think I can or cannot control. The story goes, one day the Prophet Muhammad saw his companion leave his camel without tethering it and asked him why he did this. The man replied that he was placing his trust in God and so had no need to tie the camel. The Prophet Muhammad then replied, tie your camel and place your trust in God. I'm willing to bet that my intentional and conscious efforts will make a greater positive impact in my life rather than just blindly going along and hoping that things will be good in the future. So that's where my current mindset is. The third belief I used to have was that how much money you have is directly correlated to how hard you work. So by extension, all the rich people in the world today are rich because they worked really hard. I'm sure this was all hammered to us growing up, and life would be a lot more straightforward if it worked this way. We say this to children because of course we want them to put in effort and have that effort proportionately rewarded, whether it's studying hard to get good grades or being kind and nice so people will like you. I hate to sound cynical, but it's obviously not the case. Luck and privilege are huge factors as well, and that's not to say that some people deserve their success and others don't, or that it's wrong to have privilege. It's not about that. What I learned from this realization is that everyone has a different starting point, and so it's almost pointless to compare yourself to others. How would you know where their starting point was? I have an interesting observation about this. It was far, far easier not to compare myself when I was going through all the hardship and the traumatic period of getting my house when I was 24 years old and only 6 months into my first job after graduation. During that period of my life, and maybe for a year after it, I was able to tune everyone else out and not compare myself at all because I didn't know anyone else who was going through or went through what I did. I just lived in my little bubble in my own head, feeling quite proud of myself while also having to process everything that had happened to me after the dust had settled. But then about a year after that, once I felt like I was more stable both financially and emotionally, that impulse to compare myself bubbled up again. I was starting to compare where I was working, how much I earned, my accomplishments, my hobbies. It was just an endless stream of things that are suddenly up for comparison. And the thing is, obviously when I compare myself to others, I'm not going to think very highly of myself. In the game of comparison, there's always going to be a winner and a loser, and it's awful for my self-esteem. Of course, if I compare myself to others at this moment, then I'm not very impressive or successful. But if I compare myself to my past self from 5 years ago, then I feel like I've truly accomplished so much, and it's easier to feel proud of myself. Back to my original mindset of how much money you have being an indicator of how hard you work and how that mindset has changed. It's not just the understanding that everyone has a different starting point in their financial journey, it's also understanding that many things in life that are worth putting in hard work for are not related to money. This could be things like your relationships, your health, your commitment to your hobbies. The output of your hard work is not necessarily monetary, and yet it still contributes to your overall self-worth. Long story short, just because you don't have a lot of money doesn't mean you didn't work hard, and money alone is not an indicator of someone's success. The next belief is a bit of a childish one, and that's people who think about money all the time are shallow, greedy, and calculative. When I was younger and much more naive, I knew what a selfish person looked like, and I would hear what others would say about them, that they're stingy and penny pinchers. But it wasn't until I became someone who thinks about money all the time that I started reevaluating my opinion about this. Someone who is in poverty arguably thinks about money all the time because money is what can buy them food and shelter, and money is how they can provide for their kids' education, it's how they can survive in this world. And so, when I started to have money and managing it very closely, I guess I started becoming more calculative, but I justified it to myself as being necessary for my survival. It wasn't until recently that this came up again in my consciousness. I had a friend whom I was helping with her finances. She had been sticking to a budget that we had created together for a few months, and one day we were just talking about how it's going so far, and she said that she felt like she's become less generous with such a strict budget. And it stuck with me because it occurred to me for the first time that since I started this whole budgeting thing, I had really only thought about myself. I wasn't making any room in my budget for gifting or donations or contributing to causes I believed in. They were kind of like an afterthought in my budget. I had been holding on to my wallet for dear life because for a long time that had been true. And even though I'm in a far more comfortable position now, I think my history of not having a lot of money created a scarcity mindset in me where I'm scared of losing money or letting go of it. So here's what I think now. When you're first starting out, you're still figuring out all the categories in your life that you want to prioritize and that mean something to you. But once you get there and you're comfortable, you can start to think about how you can fit generosity in your life without derailing your own goals too much. Being generous and taking care of your financial health can happen simultaneously. You can care about money but still put in effort to be a generous and ethical person. For most of us, we want to think about money more often because we don't want to have to worry about it in the future. The same way that some of us exercise even though we might not like it so much, but we do it because we want to be healthy and we want to take care of our physical health. I'm not going to be the most generous and selfless person in the world, but I know that I don't want to be a shallow, greedy, and calculative person. And always having that in the back of my mind will hopefully keep me in check and make sure that I'm staying true to my values. This next belief I used to have is that insurance is only for people with many assets. This was one of those things where I felt like a real adult when I finally understood how important it was. I used to believe that insurance was only for rich people with a lot of money or companies with a lot of liabilities, and also traveling maybe. My family never had insurance and we always went to the polyclinic and depended on subsidized public health care. It was only when I started working that I started hearing my friends talking about it. And then much later on, after reading and doing my research in tandem with my own financial literacy journey, it didn't take long for me to understand how important it was. Insurance is basically risk management, which is just a fancy way to say that it helps to protect all your hard work of building a financial safety net for yourself and your loved ones. Unfortunately for me, this realization came just a couple months too late. In 2020, I was hospitalized and it was then that I was formally diagnosed with depression. This was probably a month into my first job and also during the lockdown. I wasn't in the hospital for very long and they set me off with some medication and an appointment for counseling, and that was it. And little old me didn't realize at the time, but this event would affect my life and my finances quite dramatically for the foreseeable future. I only met my financial advisor, who was my friend's friend, a couple months after the whole thing, and I couldn't get hospitalization insurance because of my very recent diagnosis, which counted as a pre-existing condition. Insurance companies are extremely strict with mental illnesses, so I couldn't get hospitalization insurance or term life insurance. I could only get whole life insurance with loading, which means higher premiums, and a personal accident plan. And 4 years later, I still can't get covered. I had to get a formal discharge report. I don't know how someone can get discharged for depression, but I needed that $200 report for a chance at appealing to these insurance companies. And even then, the underwriters told my financial advisor that I should wait at least 5 years. So maybe next year I might be able to finally get covered. I've worked hard over the years to amass my savings since then, but I am very aware that a medical bill could wipe out a significant chunk of it. I'm hoping it doesn't happen, also because I'm the only breadwinner in the family. I just wish I had had the foresight to get covered immediately after I signed the contract for my first job, before I could get diagnosed for anything. I'm not saying don't get diagnosed for any health issues that you are facing. What I'm saying is get covered early, before any of life's curveballs can hit you and smack you in the face with exclusions. That's also why I'm such an over-planner. It's pretty morbid to always be planning for the worst case scenario, but this is also my way of coping with the fear that something terrible might happen. My life circumstances have really altered the way I think and take action, and I think I'd rather know what I can do to mitigate it, rather than be paralyzed by the fear. In a similar vein with insurance, my sixth belief change has to do with investing. When I was starting out my financial literacy journey, there was no avoiding the topic of investing. Before this, I knew about the concept of investment, like investing in good quality clothes, investing in yourself through education, that kind of thing. But I had no idea what investing entailed in the world of personal finance. And like many of us, I thought it was just the domain of rich people who had money to invest. Regular working class people like us just saved our money and took less risks. I had all the misconceptions about investing when I started, that it was only for rich people who had money to gamble, that it was complicated, and that it was also unethical. But truly, it was pages like Seedly and The Woke Salaryman that changed my entire perspective about what investing is. This was during the COVID lockdown in 2020, when I just started my full-time job, and I was figuring out how to be a responsible and financially literate adult. I'm always so immensely grateful for these pages and the work that they've put in to educate us for free about these topics. I learned that it was not only for rich people. The average median income person can invest as well to protect the money we are saving for our retirement from depreciating with inflation. And while it may have been more inaccessible to our parents in the past, it is so much more accessible now with technology and robo-advisors. In the past, you would have needed quite a huge lump sum of money in order to invest, but today you can invest as little as $1, which lowers the barrier to entry and makes it far less intimidating to start. I made my very first investment on Stashaway in 2020 with $50. Stashaway is a robo-advisor and they're sponsoring this section of the video, but all opinions are my own. Of all the robo-advisors I've used, Stashaway has been the longest and most enduring for me, which is why I always talk about it. I really like the user interface of the app, and it made my first foray into investing far less intimidating. I also appreciate that they have resources on financial literacy on their website and their app. I remember when I first downloaded the Stashaway app, I spent a couple hours just exploring the app and seeing the different portfolio options. A lot of the really serious brokerage platforms felt too complicated and overwhelming to me as someone who just learned about investing 2 days ago. I've tried out these other platforms over the past 4 years, but they are nowhere near as beginner-friendly as Stashaway was to me when I was first starting out. If you're interested in trying out Stashaway, you can use my referral link here. I get a kickback if you sign up with my link, but no pressure to sign up if you don't want to. Back to my point. While I was enlightened to the importance and necessity of investing, there were 2 things that I still struggled with. The first is my knowledge, and the second is the openness of my heart to even begin to accept what I was learning. I'll talk about the first one, which is about knowledge. This is pretty straightforward, but also time-consuming. I started my personal finance journey in 2020. I started this YouTube channel in 2022, but I'm still learning new things and I'm far from being an expert. Even after 4 years, I'm still trying to wrap my head around what index funds are and how they differ from ETFs. Honestly, I accept that my interest in these things do not come naturally, and so it takes great effort for me to educate myself and remember all these terms and the logic behind them. I'm still reading books, I'm still trying to improve my knowledge, and while I'm educating myself, I'm still investing passively with robo-advisors in boring index funds. The second thing about my heart being open to the idea, it's probably related to my hang-up of thinking that investing is only for rich people, of which I am not, and a lack of knowledge about how to invest in a way that is aligned with my values. As I've established, investing is not just for rich people, but for the longest time, even while I was already investing, I was struggling with feeling icky about the thought that you needed money to make money. It seemed evil and unfair to me as someone whose parents lived paycheck to paycheck to support the family. Eventually, I accepted that this is the system we live in, and while many things are outside our control, we can control some of our actions and reactions. I also learned that there are ways to invest ethically and intentionally and invest in companies that are working to do good in the world with business practices that we can support. So it's something that I am always reckoning with, and I can only hope that I continue to stay open-minded and hungry to learn. The second to last belief I had was that money will bring me happiness because it can buy everything I need. This one was a bit more of a complex unlearning process because I've gone back and forth on this throughout my life. When I was younger, I did think that money could buy you things that would make you happy, like all the toys and books you wanted. Then when I was a slightly more mature but still naive teenager, I denounced money and I thought that money definitely could not buy happiness. And then when I first entered the workforce as a young adult, I became a bit more cynical and pragmatic, and I veered back into thinking that it can bring happiness because security and having basic needs met is the foundation to a decent quality of life, which is the basis of a good life. And now where I stand, I'm more in the center of these two extremes. I've learned that there are other ways to find happiness and fulfillment that doesn't require the astronomical kind of money that I used to imagine. Yes, sure, $1 million would solve many of my problems and fulfill a lot of my desires today, but I can still live a good and fulfilled life without that $1 million. On a side note, and it's a completely different topic, but I have also come to the realization that a good and fulfilled life is not a destination. It's a way of thinking and living in the everyday. So it's not a place you reach at the end of the road, it's the road itself. So you choose the road you want to take. Bringing this wild analogy back to money, having money makes the road you take easier to traverse. It can make the difference between crawling on the road or cruising on it, and whether you take the scenic route or the one with a bunch of obstacles in your way. Having money lets you choose which road you want to take rather than settling for the only one you can afford. And I've learned that I want to have options. Sure, poverty builds character, but I'd rather build character through other means and circumstances. So my current mindset now is this. Money will give you options, but you still have to do the internal work yourself to achieve a state of fulfillment or contentment. Finally, the last belief I had to unlearn, and also the most recent one, that there is a right way and a wrong way to manage finances. Especially after I started working and becoming more financially literate, I began to think that the things I was doing in terms of budgeting, managing my money, the way that works for me is obviously the right way to do things, which means that the flip side is true, that if there is a right way, then there is a wrong way. For example, if you're not investing, or if you don't have this or that insurance, or if you spend your money in this way, then that's the wrong thing to do. But after a few years of thinking about personal finance and listening to different perspectives, I think that for most things, it's always going to be a value judgment according to your own standards and priorities. So it's not just that I try to be less judgmental of others now, but I also try not to judge myself too harshly for not knowing something earlier or for making decisions that I wouldn't make now. People arrive at their epiphanies at different times, and your very good advice might be terrible advice for someone if they're not coming to it at the right time. So I have to remind myself to be empathetic to others, myself included. Maybe you wish you had started investing earlier, or that you'd gotten your spending under control earlier, or that you'd bought insurance before your health issues came up. What's happened is past, and all you can do is let it go. You were a different person then, who made different choices based on what mattered to you and what information you had back then. And with that, we've come to the end of this video. Those are the 8 big mindset shifts about personal finance that have come to me in the last 4 years. I hope you found this interesting, and if you have any of your own to share, please tell me in the comments. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye bye.